It's the first day of a new year, and Grifter Grummz is already complaining about Nintendo. Devin Pitchard is gonna ruin Nintendo of America. She's a Karen in charge of marketing. She can't run the company. Yeah, that's why they assigned a Japanese guy to be the CEO. She's just the president. So essentially, it's not clear exactly what's going on with the Bowser thing. We don't actually know anything. As far as I can tell, it feels like all of the speculation about Bowser being behind this or that or censoring games is just hypothetical and has no basis in reality. I'm not sure if Nintendo actually fired Bowser or if he actually retired on his own, if there was actually anything wrong. It doesn't seem like it going by what we've been seeing. But what we have seen, and this does need to be said, is that we have seen kind of a crackdown on woke elements in games. Stuff like the they them toad, stuff like the they thems in general, stuff like stuff like that. That hasn't really been a thing over the past year. I don't think there was a single 2025 Nintendo release that had those elements. And considering all the Nintendo games we got this year, games like Metroid Prime 4, it does feel like all of the concern trolling we've been seeing over the past couple of years is no longer valid. And considering the restructuring of Nintendo of America, considering they placed a Japanese guy to oversee Nintendo of America again, I do think we're kind of in this early phase of just kind of cracking down on what some of the activists at Nintendo of America have been doing. These guys don't make games. They don't have any real power or control. Basically, what they were doing was anything they could get away with to kind of normalize their woke bullshit. Okay. And, now that that's, more polarizing, now that that's more unpopular, now that Nintendo has placed, someone who can, oversee, someone from Japan who can oversee them, I don't really see any reason to have any concern about that, especially as, over the next several years, as they hire more and more people who are more against woke culture, it's going to be this thing that just slowly dies away and becomes irrelevant. And we're already well in that period. Honestly, I don't even think the people at NOA now today are as woke as people we had in 2015. Allison Rapp was so woke they fired her. There's nothing wrong with pedophiles, she says in her college thesis. It's come on. It's just, you're never going to get that level of just people not knowing ever again, because the woke thing is over. It's not coming back. And so Grummz and people concerned trolling about Nintendo of America, you're just grifting at your core, because Nintendo of America really is just a marketing firm. All they do is distribute games in distribute games in the U.S. They just release them in the region. They don't control the developers. They don't make creative decisions in Japan. They can't even really do anything when it comes to the character designs. I keep seeing people do this thing where they're just Nintendo of America is censoring games. And then you have Xenoblade and Fire Emblem Engage. They did this weird thing where they tried to say that Xenoblade Chronicles 3 was censored when it's the most red-pilled game ever. It ends with the male protagonist of 2 banging his 3 waifus and having kids with all of them. It's you look at the narrative and you see that it just doesn't mesh with reality at all. And that's the reoccurring problem we see when we see Nintendo doing anything in this industry. Doug Bowser can't just retire and can't just leave the company and get replaced. There has to be some elaborate conspiracy around it. The narrative being that Nintendo's going woke and they're getting rid of all these white men and they're going to all these, they're making all these changes to ruin gaming forever. Nintendo is finished. It's a good thing we have Steam, which is in no way compromised in any way, shape. It's just a giant cope. And honestly, I'm very, very tired of seeing any of these people run their mouths about this, because there is no indication at all that there's been any severe drop of quality at Nintendo. There's no Neil Druckmann equivalent. There's no like forced, lesbianism in any Nintendo games. There's no like weird, political agenda, and Japan itself has just, elected the most like anti-woke PM they could find. Now, I'm sure, Japan's new PM is compromised and she's a shill, kind of like how Margaret Thatcher is like hyped up as being this like beacon of like conservatism in UK politics, when in actuality, a woman should never have been elected to the position, because, that in and of itself is a woke thing. Again, I'm sure to a certain extent, like, there is, like, the woke agenda is, like, doing everything it can to take charge of Japan, but we're at the stage now where we're kind of in, like, the early stages of a post-woke America, and we're finally starting to see what that looks like. We are being more honest about race realism. We are being more honest about, gender differences. We're being more honest about, the JQ. Like, it's all just coming together, right? Like, the idea that we're just going to inevitably progress to a more woke culture is just completely and utterly delusional, and you're already seeing people reject certain aspects of it, like, all the time. You do, like, it's becoming more well known, for example, that women don't actually want careers, that it makes them miserable, and like a lot of them are very, very open about how they feel about that. The only reason, like, anybody ever advocated for that was out of this desire of fitting in and doing the right thing. They always have to concern troll in the sense where, like, they're just like, well, what if your husband is mean to you? What if you have to leave him? What if you need financial stability? Yeah. That's why you have your family, That's why you have ties with other people. Like, yeah, when you leave him, what are you going to do? Like, immediately marry someone else, Like, all, like, even in their worst case scenarios, like, oh, I'm being beaten every day, and he's terrible to me, and he has no money. It's like, it's like they can't fathom any possible way that, like, a supposed, like, abuse victim could get out of this situation other than having a career, which is, a complete waste of her and everyone else's time. We're reaching that point, honestly, where more and more people are, like, acknowledging that there's a problem with woke culture, there's a problem with video game dev, there's a problem with society as a whole, and we're in the early stages of correcting it. Now, obviously, this is going to happen overnight, but conversely, it's not going to get, like, there's not going to be some total 180 where, like, everything becomes shit. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people like Grummz and, like, RGE and people like that think. They really think that Nintendo is just going to fall off overnight and that no one's going to buy their consoles anymore and they're just going to become completely irrelevant, which is so out of touch and ridiculous. I find it laughable, honestly. These are the people who hype up games like Nikkei and think it's some, like, major cultural phenomenon and this, like, huge deal. But in actuality, Pokemon Go was way bigger, more successful, and is not tied to, like, one specific mobile release. You know what I mean? Like, Nintendo innovates with the Pokemon brand more than Shift Up ever will for Nikkei, or for any of the other games that these people have shilled over the years. Whether it's like Nier Automata or like Yakuza 0 or Persona 5, yeah, we see this a lot where it feels like everyone else in the industry is collapsing. Everyone else in the industry is having all these problems and are completely incapable of, like, really doing anything of value at all. And yet, like, the narrative, like, constantly is this idea that Nintendo is going to fail and, like, start producing, like, absolute garbage. And that's just so laughably untrue. Like, it's, and it really does need to get called out more. Like, I am very, 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 very disappointed at just how people have handled the situation. I hate people who have, like, demonized Bowser. I hate people who are, like, seething about Devin Pritchard, who, by the way, has been at Nintendo of America for, like, 20 years. I'm not happy with people like misrepresenting the situation. I'm not happy with people making things up, and I'm certainly not happy with the sheer amount of people in the community who are still in denial about the fact that the Nintendo Switch 2 is this huge success story. A while back you saw all these people talking about oh, Nintendo's stock has taken a huge dip. They've lost 14 billion in stock for there was all of this insane conspiracy theory and speculation, and then when you actually look at the chart, when you look at Nintendo's actual stock prices, you see that it's way higher than it was last decade. The massive dip that everyone's been complaining about, it's still way higher than they were 10 years ago. So it's just a complete and total cope in my experience. Everything you see regarding anti-Nintendo coverage, whether it's Metroid Prime 4 or whether it's Kirby Air Riders or Pokemon Legends CA, all of it is just completely untrue. And honestly, considering what these people are like and how they behave, I honestly don't want to hear about them anymore. I honestly don't care, I'm past the point of listening to these people or thinking their opinion matters, because what it really comes down to at its core is that these are the people who would never, under any circumstances, buy a Nintendo console or play a Nintendo game ever. And that's becoming very, very apparent. Just look at Metroid Prime 4 and how many people constantly seethe about this idea that that there could be NPCs in Metroid, or that a game can be structured this way, or the gameplay mechanics that, really have been built up for decades at this point, that was a very apparent thing. Someone like me who does play Metroid Prime, was not surprised by the direction they took at all. And yet the narrative from the community is this idea that Samus has to be alone all the time, which is so completely delusional and out of touch that it really needs to get called out. I was seeing people say that oh, there was no dialogue or exposition in Super Metroid, and yet that game begins with that epic intro scene that everyone loves. It's delusional, honestly. It's just completely out of touch, and it really does need to get called out for what it is: a gigantic cope on the part of the PC gaming community.